Maria sat on the wooden bench outside the small grocery store, holding her worn-out purse close to her chest. Inside that purse was a single $5 bill, the last piece of money she had. Her eyes glanced at her little boy, Daniel, who stood beside her. He was only 6 years old, his shirt a little too big, his shoes scratched and old, yet his smile was full of innocence. "Mom, I'm hungry," Daniel said softly, looking at her with hopeful eyes. Maria felt her heart twist. For days, she had been trying to stretch whatever food they had left at home. But that morning, the kitchen shelves were nearly empty. She knew she had to use her last $5, no matter what. Her son needed to eat, even if it meant she would go hungry. With a deep breath, she stood and held Daniel's hand. "Let's go inside," she whispered. The grocery store was filled with the smell of fresh bread and warm cooked meals from the deli counter. Maria walked slowly down the aisles, her mind racing. $5 wasn't much. She carefully picked up a small loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a single apple. She counted in her head, praying the total would not go beyond what she had. At the counter, the cashier smiled at Daniel, then scanned the items. "That'll be $4.90, the cashier said kindly. Maria let out a breath of relief and pulled the crumpled bill from her purse. She handed it over, watching as the cashier placed the change, just 10 cents, into her palm. It was all she had left now. Outside, she sat again on the bench with Daniel. She tore the bread into small pieces, poured milk into a paper cup for him, and cut the apple with the little plastic knife the cashier had given her. Daniel's face lit up as he began to eat happily. Maria smiled at him, though her stomach ached with hunger. Watching him eat was enough to fill her heart. She had nothing left, but at least her boy had food in his hands and joy in his eyes. What Maria didn't know was that someone had been watching her the entire time. Across the street, inside a sleek black car with tinted windows, a man sat quietly. His name was Adrian. He was a billionaire, young, successful, admired by many. People often surrounded him for his money, his fame, or his influence. But Adrian was tired of shallow friendships and fake smiles. Deep down, he wanted something simple and real: kindness, honesty, and love that had nothing to do with his wealth. As he watched Maria carefully spend her last bill on her son, Adrian felt something stir in his chest. The world around him was full of people chasing riches, yet here was a woman who gave away her very last dollar without hesitation just to feed her child. Her face showed quiet strength, her hands trembled slightly with worry, but her eyes glowed with love for her son. Adrian leaned back in his seat, lost in thought. He had attended countless charity events, written checks worth millions, and supported organizations. But never had he seen such pure sacrifice in front of his eyes. Daniel laughed suddenly, showing his bread to his mother like it was a treasure. Maria laughed too, brushing his hair gently, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The driver of the car glanced at Adrian through the mirror. "Sir, shall we go?" Adrian shook his head. "Not yet," he replied softly, still watching the mother and child. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their story. But he felt drawn to them in a way he couldn't explain. In that simple act, spending her last $5 for her child, Maria had unknowingly touched the heart of a man who owned more money than he could ever spend. As the sun began to set, Maria gathered the little bag of groceries and stood up. She held Daniel's hand, and together they began walking down the street toward their small apartment. Adrian watched them until they disappeared around the corner. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt curious, not about a new business deal, not about the stock market, not about any luxury he could buy. Instead, he wanted to know more about this woman with the gentle smile and the quiet strength. That night, Maria tucked Daniel into bed. He fell asleep quickly, full and content. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, wondering how she would manage tomorrow. Her heart was heavy, but she whispered a prayer of thanks that her son had eaten today. And somewhere else in the city, Adrian sat in his grand apartment, staring out at the same night sky. He thought about the mother and son he had seen. He didn't know it yet, but this small encounter would change all of their lives in ways none of them could imagine. It all began with $5 and a heart full of love. The next morning, Maria woke up early. The tiny apartment was quiet except for the soft breathing of her son, Daniel. She looked at him sleeping peacefully and felt both love and worry. She needed to find a way to earn money soon. Bills were waiting, and the little food they had wouldn't last long. After getting ready, she kissed Daniel's forehead and whispered, "Be good today, my love." She left him in the care of her kind neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, and went out to look for work. Maria had applied to many places before, but with no luck. Still, she held on to hope. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his office high above the city. The large windows showed tall buildings and busy streets, but his mind was far away. He kept thinking about the woman he had seen yesterday. The way she used her last money for her child stayed in his thoughts. It was a picture he couldn't forget. Adrian usually began his day with meetings and phone calls, but today he felt restless. For once, numbers and reports didn't excite him. Instead, he found himself asking questions he had never asked before. Who was she? What was her story? Did she have family? Did anyone help her? By noon, he made a decision. "Cancel my afternoon schedule," he told his assistant. "I want to walk around the city." It was unusual for Adrian to go out without a clear plan, but something inside pushed him to do it. He didn't tell anyone the real reason he wanted to see if fate would let him cross paths with the woman again. That same afternoon, Maria entered a small cafe where a help wanted sign hung on the door. She stepped inside nervously. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. Behind the counter stood the cafe owner, a cheerful middle-aged woman. "Good afternoon," Maria said softly. "I saw the sign. Are you still hiring?" The owner looked her up and down kindly. "Yes, dear. Do you have experience?" Maria nodded. "I used to work in a bakery. I can serve customers, clean, and help with the kitchen." The woman smiled. "We need someone part-time. It's not much, but it's steady work. Would you like to try?" Maria's heart lifted. "Yes, I would. Thank you so much." She began her first shift that very day. It was hard work taking orders, cleaning tables, carrying trays, but she didn't mind. Every small paycheck meant food and safety for Daniel. As evening came, the cafe grew busier. People chatted, laughed, and sipped their drinks. Maria wiped a table near the window when the door opened, and a tall man walked in. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, though his confident walk made him stand out. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, they landed on her. It was Adrian. He hadn't expected it. He had wandered through several streets and finally stepped into this cafe, only to see the same woman he had been thinking about all day. His chest tightened with surprise. Maria, on the other hand, didn't recognize him. To her, he looked like any other customer. She gave a polite smile and said, "Good evening. Would you like to sit by the window? Yes, thank you, Adrian replied, his voice calm but warm. She handed him a menu and went back to the counter. Adrian watched her as she worked. She moved quickly, always polite to customers, always gentle in her words. Yet he noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the way she held her hands close to her apron as if she carried invisible burdens. When Maria returned, he ordered a cup of coffee. And maybe one of those apple pies, he added with a smile. Maria nodded, writing it down. Right away. As she walked back to the kitchen, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet excitement. He didn't want to see her as just a stranger anymore. He wanted to know her story, the truth behind her gentle strength. When she brought the coffee and pie, Adrian said softly, "You work very hard." Maria blinked, surprised by the kind tone. I try my best," she answered. "Is your son doing well?" he asked suddenly, remembering the little boy. Maria froze. "You saw us yesterday?" she asked, her voice unsure. Adrian nodded. "I happened to be nearby. I saw how you cared for him. It was beautiful." Her cheeks warmed, both from surprise and a little embarrassment. "I only did what any mother would do," she whispered. Adrian wanted to say more, but he held back. He didn't want to frighten her. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "That makes you stronger than most people I know." Maria didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded and excused herself to serve another customer. That night, when she returned home, she thought about the man at the cafe. His words echoed in her mind. Stronger than most people I know. She had no idea who he truly was, but somehow, his kindness made her feel seen. Meanwhile, Adrian left the cafe with a quiet determination. He knew now that meeting her wasn't just chance. Something deeper was pulling him toward her. For the first time in years, his heart was curious, not about wealth or power but about a woman who had nothing, yet gave everything for love. And he was ready to see where this path would lead. The next few days passed quietly, but Maria found herself thinking often about the man from the cafe. His kind eyes, his gentle words, and the way he spoke about her strength, it was unusual. Most people never noticed her struggles, and if they did, they quickly turned away. But this stranger had spoken with warmth, as if her efforts truly mattered. Adrian, too, thought about her. Each day, he managed his business meetings, signed documents, and answered calls, but his mind often drifted back to the small cafe and the woman working there. For once, he felt more interested in a simple coffee shop than in his expensive boardrooms. By the end of the week, Adrian returned to the cafe. He dressed simply again, not wanting to stand out. When Maria saw him, her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him again, but part of her had hoped he might return. "Good evening," she greeted politely, her voice softer than before. Adrian smiled. "Good evening. May I sit here again?" He pointed to the same table by the window. "Of course," Maria said, setting down a menu. As she walked back to the counter, Maria felt a strange mix of nervousness and comfort. Something about him was different. His presence was calm, not heavy or demanding. When she returned with his coffee, he spoke again. "Have you lived in the city long?" he asked. "Yes," Maria said slowly. "All my life. It's home, though life is not always easy here." Adrian nodded, listening carefully. He wanted her to feel safe sharing her thoughts. "I understand," he replied. "Life can be heavy at times. but I believe small kindness can make it lighter. Maria tilted her head, studying him. His words sounded thoughtful, almost wise, but his simple clothes made him look like an ordinary man. She wondered what kind of life he lived, what brought him to this cafe again and again. Before she could ask, another customer called for her, and she hurried away. Adrian watched her move around, serving with patience, never complaining. He admired her strength even more. That evening, as the cafe grew quieter, Adrian stayed longer than usual. When Maria finally had a moment free, she found him still sitting by the window, looking out at the street lights. "You stayed late," she said gently. "I didn't notice the time," Adrian answered with a small smile. "It feels peaceful here." Maria chuckled softly. "Most people don't call a busy cafe peaceful." Adrian leaned forward. "Maybe it's not the cafe. Maybe it's the people inside it." His eyes rested on her for a moment, and Maria felt her cheeks grow warm. She quickly changed the subject. Do you have family here?" Adrian paused, choosing his words carefully. He rarely spoke about his personal life. "No close family," he said. "Most of my days are filled with work. But sometimes, work is not enough." Maria nodded, understanding more than he realized. She, too, knew what it was like to carry burdens silently. Just then, the cafe owner called Maria to the kitchen. Before she left, Adrian said softly, "Thank you for speaking with me. It means more than you know." That night, Maria walked home with a small smile. Daniel ran to her as soon as she entered the apartment, hugging her tightly. She handed him a leftover pastry the owner had given her. As he ate happily, Maria sat by the window, thinking about the stranger who spoke with such kindness. She didn't even know his name, yet she felt as if she had known him longer than a few short meetings. On the other side of the city, Adrian returned to his grand apartment. The view of the shining skyline stretched before him, but it felt strangely empty. For the first time, he didn't pour himself wine or read reports. Instead, he sat down and thought about Maria and her son. He remembered the way Daniel had laughed with his bread in hand, the way Maria had given her last dollar without hesitation. He thought about her gentle smile, her tired but hopeful eyes. And he realized he wanted to see her not just as a stranger, but as someone important in his life. The next day, Adrian returned to the cafe again. This time, he brought a small gift, a simple toy car wrapped in paper. He remembered how Daniel's eyes had shone with joy that day, and he wanted to give the boy something. When Maria saw the gift, she looked surprised. "What is this?" she asked softly. "It's for your son," Adrian said. "I hope he will like it." Her first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't used to receiving gifts, especially from people she barely knew. But something in Adrian's expression, gentle, sincere, with no hidden motives, made her pause. Slowly, she accepted the small box. "Thank you," she whispered. "Daniel will be very happy." Adrian smiled, and for a moment, their eyes met. Maria felt her heart stir with something unfamiliar, something she didn't dare name yet. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know that the man sitting in front of her could buy the entire cafe if he wished. All she knew was that he was kind, and in her difficult life, kindness was rare and precious. For Adrian, every moment with her was proof that real love wasn't built on riches. It was built on simple gestures, honest words, and the quiet beauty of a heart that cared. And so, without realizing it, their paths began to weave closer together, two very different lives slowly finding a connection. Maria sat at the small kitchen table that evening, watching Daniel push the little toy car back and forth across the wooden surface. His laughter filled the apartment, light and joyful. It was the first new toy he had received in a long time, and Maria could see how much it meant to him. She smiled softly, but inside her heart was unsettled. The man from the cafe, kind, gentle, and thoughtful, had given Daniel the gift. But who was he really? Why would someone she barely knew show such care? "Mom, he's nice," Daniel said suddenly, not looking up from the car. Maria blinked. "Who, dear?" "The man who gave me this. He smiled at you." "He likes you," Daniel replied in his innocent way. Maria chuckled, brushing her son's hair. "Don't say such things. He is just a kind person, that's all." Yet even as she spoke, she wondered if there was more truth in her son's words than she wished to admit. Across the city, Adrian sat in his office, but the papers before him were forgotten. His thoughts were filled with Maria. Every time he saw her, he felt drawn closer, but he also felt the weight of a secret, his true identity. To Maria, he was just a simple man visiting a cafe. She had no idea that he was one of the city's wealthiest businessmen, a billionaire whose name appeared in newspapers and magazines. Adrian worried what would happen if she found out. Would she treat him differently? Would the kindness in her eyes vanish, replaced by distance or awe? He didn't want that. He wanted her to know him, not his wealth. That was why he dressed simply, why he spoke humbly, hiding the life he usually lived. For the first time, Adrian wished he could be ordinary. The next evening, Adrian returned to the cafe. Maria greeted him with her usual polite smile, though inside she felt her heart flutter a little faster than before. She placed his coffee on the table and hesitated. "You come here often now," she said softly. "Do you live nearby?" Adrian met her gaze calmly. "Not very far," he replied, careful with his words. "I find this place peaceful." Maria nodded, though she sensed there was more he wasn't saying. She wanted to ask more questions but didn't dare. Instead, she excused herself and returned to her work. Later that night, when the cafe grew quiet, Adrian found the courage to ask something he had been thinking about. "Maria," he said gently, "would it be all right if I walked you home after your shift? Just to make sure you and your son are safe." Maria was surprised. She wasn't used to men offering such gestures. Still, something in his voice reassured her. After a pause, she nodded. "All right. But only to the corner of my street." When her shift ended, they walked together under the dim streetlights. Daniel was waiting at the neighbor's, and Maria carried him in her arms as he slept, while Adrian walked beside her. The streets were quiet, the air cool. "You work very hard," Adrian said softly. "It must not be easy." Maria sighed. "It isn't. But I do it for him," she whispered, adjusting Daniel's small body against her shoulder. "He is all I have. As long as he is safe and fed, I can face anything." Adrian looked at her with admiration. "That makes you stronger than you know." Maria glanced at him, noticing the sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to believe his words, but a small voice inside wondered, why is he so kind to me? What does he want? When they reached the corner of her street, Maria stopped. "Thank you for walking with us. This is far enough." Adrian nodded, though part of him wished he could walk further, step into her world more deeply. "Good night, Maria," he said gently. "Good night," she replied, watching as he walked away. Inside her apartment, Maria laid Daniel in bed and sat by the window. She thought about the stranger who seemed to care for her more than anyone had in years. She didn't even know his name. It was strange, yet her heart felt lighter whenever he was near. At the same time, Adrian returned to his apartment filled with luxury, but he felt restless. He didn't want Maria to discover his wealth too soon. Not like this. He wanted her to see him as the man he truly was, without the shadow of money standing between them. But he knew secrets could not last forever. In the days that followed, Maria's curiosity grew. Who was this man who came often, who spoke so kindly, and who seemed to notice her in ways no one else did? One afternoon, as she cleared his table, she finally asked, "You never told me your name." Adrian paused, then smiled faintly. "My name is Adrian." Maria repeated it quietly, as if tasting the sound. "Adrian. It suits you." From that moment, his name stayed in her mind. And though Maria still didn't know the truth of who Adrian really was, she felt her heart opening slowly, like a flower touched by morning sun. Adrian, on the other hand, knew each step brought him closer to a choice, to keep his world hidden, or to let her see everything. Either way, the connection between them was growing stronger, gentle, honest, and real. The days turned into weeks, and Adrian's visits to the cafe became more frequent. At first, Maria thought it was only coincidence, but soon she realized he was choosing to spend his evenings there. Each time, he sat at the same table by the window, ordered the same coffee, and sometimes a slice of pie. Yet what made her heart warm was not the coffee or the pie, it was the way he looked at her, as if she mattered in a world that often overlooked her. But slowly, Maria began to notice little things about him that didn't quite fit. One evening, as she served his coffee, she caught sight of his wristwatch. It wasn't flashy, but the design was elegant and expensive. She had once seen a similar watch in a store window, far beyond anything she could afford. Another time, when he reached for his wallet, she noticed how neat and fine the leather looked. Even the way he carried himself, calm, confident, and steady, spoke of someone who was used to more than a simple life. Maria wondered silently. Who really is Adrian? One night, as they walked home together again, she asked carefully, "What kind of work do you do?" Adrian smiled, keeping his answer gentle. "I manage businesses. It keeps me busy most days." Maria tilted her head. "You speak like someone who carries a lot of responsibility." He chuckled softly. "Perhaps. But sometimes I wish life could be simpler. Money, success, and big offices do not always bring peace." Maria looked at him with surprise. His words hinted at a life far bigger than she had imagined, yet he spoke with such humility that she didn't know what to think. At home that night, she lay awake wondering. If he has so much, why would he come here, to a small cafe, to talk with someone like me? Meanwhile, Adrian struggled with the same thoughts in his own apartment. He wanted to tell Maria the truth, but fear held him back. He had seen how people changed once they knew his name, suddenly polite, suddenly eager to please, suddenly different. But Maria was not like that. She was honest, real, and unafraid to show her struggles. He didn't want to lose that. One Saturday afternoon, Maria had a day off from the cafe. She took Daniel to the park, letting him run and play freely. The sun shone, children laughed, and for a moment, her worries felt lighter. As Daniel played with his toy car in the sand, Maria sat on a bench, watching him. To her surprise, she saw Adrian walking toward them. He wore simple clothes again, but there was something about his presence that made people glance at him as he passed. "Adrian," she said, smiling in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I was nearby," he answered, sitting beside her. "And I thought I might see you." Daniel ran over and hugged his mother before looking up at Adrian with curious eyes. "You came," he said excitedly. Adrian laughed softly. "Yes, I came. How's the little car?" Daniel held it up proudly. "It's the best." "Thank you." Watching them together, Maria felt something stir in her heart. Adrian wasn't just kind to her, he truly cared for Daniel too. That meant more to her than anything. They spent the afternoon together, watching Daniel play. Maria noticed how naturally Adrian joined in helping Daniel build a sandcastle, chasing him gently across the grass, and listening to his small stories with patience. When the sun began to set, Maria and Adrian sat quietly while Daniel rested beside them. Maria finally spoke what had been on her mind. "Adrian, sometimes I feel you are not telling me everything. You seem different." Adrian looked at her with calm eyes. "Different in what way?" She hesitated. "You speak like a man who has seen more of the world than most. And the little things, the way you dress, the watch you wear, the words you choose, they don't match someone ordinary. But I don't understand why someone like you would spend time with me." Her words were soft, not accusing, but filled with honesty. Adrian's heart ached at her question. He wanted to tell her everything in that moment, but instead, he placed his hand gently over his chest. "Maria, I spend time with you because you are real. You are kind, strong, and brave. That is worth more than anything else I have." Maria lowered her eyes, touched by his words, yet still unsure. She wanted to trust him, but a part of her wondered if there was a truth he was keeping hidden. That night, after they parted, Maria sat by her window again, holding her son close as he slept. She whispered to herself, "Adrian, who are you really?" And across the city, Adrian stood on the balcony of his grand apartment, the lights of skyscrapers glowing all around him. He knew the time was coming when he would have to reveal his true self. He could not hide forever. The question was, would Maria still look at him the same way when she discovered the truth? The next week brought changes Maria did not expect. Life at the cafe continued as usual, but whispers began among the staff. One afternoon, the cafe owner leaned close to Maria and whispered, "That gentleman who visits you often, do you know who he is?" Maria blinked. "He is just a kind customer. His name is Adrian." The owner raised her brows. "Maria, I think he is not just any customer. Yesterday, I saw him leaving the cafe. A man in a black suit was waiting by a car outside, an expensive car. He opened the door for Adrian like he was someone very important." Maria's heart skipped. She tried to brush it off, but her mind returned to the little signs she had noticed before: the watch, the confidence, the way he spoke. Could it be true? That evening, Adrian returned to the cafe as usual. Maria placed his coffee down and sat quietly across from him for a moment. "Adrian," she said softly, "may I ask you something?" He looked at her calmly. "Of course. Why do people seem to know you?" "The cafe owner said she saw you with a driver, and I can't help but notice you sometimes speak like someone used to a different life. Who are you really?" Adrian held her gaze, his heart heavy. He had promised himself he would not lie to her, but he also feared her reaction. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then he said gently, "Maria, I want you to know me for who I am, not for what I have." That is why I never spoke about it. But yes, I live a life that is different from what it seems here. Maria frowned slightly, unsure what to make of his words. Before she could ask more, another customer called for her, and she had to leave the table. That night, Maria lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was torn between curiosity and fear. If Adrian was someone important, why would he choose to spend time with her, a single mother struggling to survive? The answer came unexpectedly a few days later. Maria had just finished her shift when she stepped outside the cafe. To her surprise, Adrian was waiting, but not alone. His driver stood beside a sleek black car, polished and shining under the streetlights. Maria froze. The sight was too clear to ignore. Adrian stepped forward, his face calm but serious. "Maria," he said gently, "I think it's time you knew the truth." She swallowed hard, clutching her apron. "Truth?" Adrian nodded. "Yes. I am not an ordinary man. I manage more than just small businesses. I own companies, many of them. People know me as a wealthy man, a billionaire." Maria felt her knees weaken. The words sounded unreal, almost like a story from a magazine. She shook her head slowly. "No, that can't be." "It is," Adrian said softly. "I hid it because I didn't want it to stand between us. I wanted you to see me as Adrian, the man who enjoys coffee at your cafe, the man who admires your strength, not as someone rich or powerful." Maria's heart pounded. She looked at him, searching his eyes for any trace of dishonesty, but all she saw was sincerity. Why would someone like you spend time with me?" she whispered. "Because you are real," Adrian replied simply. "When I first saw you with your son, using your last $5 to feed him, I realized you had something no amount of money could buy: pure love, sacrifice, and honesty. That touched me more than anything else." Tears filled Maria's eyes, though she tried to hold them back. "Adrian, I don't know what to say. I live in a small apartment. I barely make enough to keep food on the table. Our worlds are so different." Adrian stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Worlds may be different, Maria, but hearts are not. What matters is kindness, trust, and love." For a long moment, Maria stood in silence. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust the kindness she had felt from the very beginning. Another part of her feared disappointment. What if his world swallowed hers? What if she lost herself in something she could never truly belong to? Finally, she whispered, "I need time, Adrian. Time to understand all this." Adrian nodded, respecting her heart. "Take all the time you need. I will wait." That night, Maria returned home carrying heavy thoughts. Daniel greeted her with his usual bright smile, and she hugged him tightly. Looking into his innocent eyes, she knew one truth: whatever path she chose, it had to be for his happiness too. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his grand apartment, the city lights glowing beneath him. For once, the wealth surrounding him felt meaningless. The only thing he hoped for was Maria's trust. Two hearts, so different in their worlds, now stood at a turning point. The truth was out. The next step would decide everything. Maria spent the following days in deep thought. Every time she looked at Daniel, she remembered Adrian's words: "Worlds may be different, but hearts are not." Yet fear still lingered inside her heart. She had lived her whole life struggling, counting every coin, watching every step. To step into Adrian's world felt like walking into another universe. At the cafe, her co-workers whispered more whenever Adrian appeared. Now that they knew who he truly was, they looked at him differently with respect, awe, even envy. But Maria noticed something: Adrian himself never changed. He still came with the same gentle smile, still ordered the same coffee, still spoke to her as if she was the only one in the room. One evening after her shift, Adrian waited outside again. Maria hesitated but then walked toward him. He greeted her warmly and asked, "May I walk with you?" She nodded, and they strolled side by side under the soft glow of the streetlights. For a while, neither spoke, until finally Maria broke the silence. "Adrian, I've been thinking. Our lives are not the same. I am afraid of what people will say. They may think I am with you for money, not for who you are." Adrian stopped walking and looked at her with steady eyes. "Maria, people will always talk. But what matters is the truth between us. You never asked me for anything. You never treated me differently, even when you learned who I was. That is why I trust you. That is why I care for you." Maria lowered her eyes, touched by his words. She thought about the day she had spent her last $5 on Daniel. At that time, she had felt invisible, unnoticed by the world. Yet that very moment had brought Adrian into her life. Perhaps fate had seen her heart when no one else did. The following weekend, Adrian invited Maria and Daniel to the city park again. This time, he brought a picnic basket filled with simple food: sandwiches, fruit, and juice. Nothing fancy, nothing overwhelming, just enough to make the afternoon special. Daniel ran happily across the grass while Maria and Adrian sat together on a blanket. For the first time, Maria saw not the billionaire, but simply a man who wanted to share laughter and sunshine with her and her child. "Adrian," she said softly, "I think I understand now. It doesn't matter how different our worlds are. What matters is how you make Daniel smile, how you make me feel seen. That is something I cannot ignore." Adrian's eyes softened. "Maria, are you saying what I hope you are?" She smiled gently. "Yes. I may not have riches to give, but I have honesty and love. If you are willing to accept a simple woman like me, then I am willing to walk this path with you." Adrian reached for her hand, his heart full. "Maria, that is all I ever wanted. Not wealth, not admiration, just something true." At that moment, Daniel ran back to them, holding a small flower he had picked. He placed it in his mother's hand and then looked up at Adrian. "You're staying with us, right?" he asked innocently. Adrian laughed, his eyes warm. "Yes, if your mom will let me." Maria looked at her son, then at Adrian, and nodded. Yes. From that day forward, their lives slowly began to change. Adrian did not sweep Maria into luxury overnight, nor did he try to erase her simple world. Instead, he walked beside her, step by step, proving that his love was not about money but about trust and respect. He visited their small apartment often, sharing meals at the little wooden table. He played with Daniel in the park, helped him with schoolwork, and listened to his endless stories. He learned to love the small details of Maria's life: the old curtains by the window, the creak of the kitchen chair, the laughter of a child in a modest home. Maria, in turn, visited Adrian's world sometimes. She saw the tall buildings, the elegant offices, the polished cars. At first, it felt overwhelming, but Adrian never let her feel out of place. He held her hand and reminded her that she belonged not because of wealth, but because of who she was. Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. What began with a single $5 bill had turned into a story of love built on kindness and sacrifice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of gold, Adrian stood with Maria and Daniel in the park where they had shared so many moments. He looked at Maria, his voice gentle yet full of promise. "Maria, you gave your last $5 not knowing anyone was watching. That act showed me the kind of heart you have. It changed my life. And today, I want to promise you this: I will stand with you and Daniel, not because I can offer wealth, but because I can offer love." Tears filled Maria's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She held Daniel close, reached for Adrian's hand, and whispered, "That is all I ever wanted." And so, under the open sky, with the sound of children playing in the distance and the warmth of the evening sun around them, a new chapter of their lives began, one not written by riches or poverty, but by the quiet power of love, trust, and hope. It had all started with a mother's sacrifice, a child's innocent smile, and a billionaire's search for something real. And together, they found it.